Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of FlightCrit Friday. My name is Sean Eaton. I am your host, and today we're going to be talking about flight fundamental. Well, we're going to be talking about survival, is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be breaking down section 2 on the Board of Critical Care Transport Paramedic Certifications Flight Paramedic or FPC study guide. I'm going to be breaking it down into a couple different sections. So today we're going to be going over survival as the part, the survival part from the aircraft fundamentals, safety and survival. And then next week we will be going over part 2. And we'll be talking about safety as well as aircraft fundamentals. So let's get started. By the time you're watching this video, I will have just been coming off of shift and I'll be driving home. So this is a pre-recorded episode this week. Generally, I will not be doing these pre-recorded episodes, but I wanted to make sure that I get this out to everybody. So I just want to say, hey, you can tweet me questions, and I will get them while I'm on my way home. I want you to send your questions. You can tweet me on Twitter, and you can use the hashtag FlightCrit Friday. All one hashtag. So FlightCrit Friday. All right. And I will be getting those questions while I'm on my way home. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about, like I said, survival. And some of the topics that we're going to be talking about are the psychology of survival and the survivalist's mindset. We're going to talk about the steps to survival, some of the initial actions that you need to take when you find yourself in a survival situation, how to prioritize your response immediately after you find yourself in a survival situation. And then we're going to talk about some of the skills, tools, and strategies for survival, things that are going to give you the best chance of making it out of your situation intact. So, like I mentioned in my initial announcement about this broadcast, this section of the FPC exam encompasses 14 questions, all aircraft fundamentals, survival, and safety, all encompassing. And that's a fairly large portion of your exam. Again, like I've said in the past, everything that I am covering, what I'm covering is not all-inclusive, but these are the key tips that I have pulled from speaking with other people who have taken the exam, as well as my experience taking the exam. So let's get started. To start, when I say survival situation, what do you think about? You probably think about an aircraft, a crash. For one reason or another, you've crashed in the middle of the desert or wherever you've crashed. And I want you to realize that survival does not just result from a crash. Okay, there are many reasons why you might find yourself in a forced landing situation. Off the top of my head, some that I can think of are mechanical failures, unexpected weather situations. There was a crew that I knew where I flew back east that had a pilot that suffered a stroke while flying. Now, if a crew member has a medical emergency, well, it's tragic. It's a problem, but it's not as dangerous as if the pilot suffers a medical emergency. The pilot can still fly to the hospital and get care for both the patient and the crew member. But if the pilot suffers a medical emergency, you're stuck, and you hope that you can make it to the ground quickly and safely. So those are some other reasons, but just remember, it's not just a crash. Okay, so let's getting right into this. I talked about the psychology of survival, and you'll hear, if you do any kind of research, you'll find things called the human factor, and the human factor is just what it sounds like. It is the the individual's willingness to survive, or the will to survive. And research upon research, the Army does a lot of it. They find that an individual's ability to maintain a positive attitude and maintain a will to survive is the biggest factor in whether somebody will make it out of a situation. So the will to survive, having that will to survive, or the can-do attitude, I will get out of the situation, is paramount. And I highlight that in my study guide, which you'll be able to download as soon as this broadcast is done from the website. It's very important when you operate in this environment to prepare yourself both mentally and physically. It's very easy to have the mindset of it can't happen to me, but it absolutely can. And so you have to prepare your mind as well as your body and your equipment for finding yourself in a circumstance where you have to protect yourself. You have to fight to survive. And that's going to get us into the next, the steps of survival, our next section, the steps of survival. And I want you to remember the acronym STOP, S-T-O-P. STOP stands for stop, think, observe, and plan, S-T-O-P. Okay, what this is saying is in the immediate moments, minutes, hours after an accident or after you find yourself stranded, there's going to be a sense of panic. And the first thing you need to do is you need to stop. Don't do anything hasty. You don't know where you are or what your circumstances are at that very moment. So the best thing to do is just to stop, collect yourself, calm your mind, and realize that you are in a survival situation. The next thing is to think about the circumstance. Really put things into perspective and understand exactly what your situation is. Are you half a mile from a road that you saw when you're on descent to the ground? Are you are you out in the middle of nowhere? Are you on the top of a mountain? What are your circumstances? Okay, then that's going to transition right into the next phase, which is observe. You need to observe your surroundings. You need to figure out what equipment you have. Are you hurt? What is your environment? And then you need to come up with a plan. So that's just a quick overview, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the initial actions immediately following an accident or a forced landing or whatever it may be is to first and foremost ensure crew safety, your safety, your crew member's safety, and then your pilot or your patient's safety. If the aircraft is unsafe to be around, make sure that you get away from the aircraft. If there are hazards in and around the crash site or the landing site, make sure you remove yourself from that situation. Next, you're going to treat immediate injuries. You're going to splint broken bones. You're going to stop bleeding. Anything that you need to do. This is remember, this is survival, and this goes back to just surviving the circumstance, and you need to give yourself the best chance possible to survive this situation. And if you're injured or your crew members are injured, you have to address those situations first. Okay, like I said before, the next thing is to just stop, find calm, realize that you're in an emergency, and allow yourself a few moments to process the surroundings. Okay. Then you're going to assess the situation, you're going to assess your scene, and you need to determine what resources you have available to you. So situation is, like I said before, how far are you from a road, or how remote are you? Are people injured? Okay. You're going to look at your scene, figure out what resources do you have around you. Are you in the middle of the desert? Are you in the middle of Alaska? Are you in the forest? Where are you, and what resources do you have available to you? When I say resources, that doesn't just mean the equipment on your body. That means, are there rocks nearby? Is there wreckage from the aircraft? What equipment do you have from the aircraft that you can salvage and use to get you through this circumstance? If the aircraft's totaled, don't worry about it. don't worry about ripping a door off and using it for additional shelter. Okay, you don't care about that. You don't worry about the fact that, if you can drain fuel, if you can drain gasoline from the oil from the aircraft, you need that to survive. And so those are resources that are available to you. Every aircraft should have a survival kit in there. You have medical supplies. There's debris from the aircraft, like I said, doors and the cushions from the seats, the paper from the pilot's charts. All of that stuff, it's all a resource to you. The wiring from the electrical system, you can use that for tying up shelters and whatnot. And then, like I said, the fuel and the oil, that can be used for collecting or for starting fires and for creating smoke signals, which we'll get into in a little bit. And the next thing is to develop a plan. You need to have a plan, and we're going to go into how you're going to prioritize your plan of action immediately after a crash here in just a minute. But something that I want to say now, and I'm going to repeat it multiple times, you'll hear this on the test, is conserve, conserve, conserve. You want to conserve your energy, you want to conserve your resources, and you want to conserve your water and your food if you have any of that. So conserve. Everything you do, you want to make sure that you're doing in a way that maximizes the effectiveness of your resources. Okay. So first and foremost, after you've developed this plan, you're going to have to work either as a team or by yourself if you're the only one left. You're going to keep busy. Okay. Keeping busy prevents panic. It keeps you occupied. It keeps morale high. It keeps you working towards a goal. Now, I don't mean, building a log cabin. I mean, keeping busy, doing things that are going to sustain you long enough till you can, until rescue arrives. Okay. And that's what I mean. Okay. So now we talked about having a plan. The priorities of survival need to be based around the rules of three. Okay, the rules of three will probably be on your exam. Okay, and the rules of three for survival state this: that most people can survive with 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in an extreme environment, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Okay, the rule of threes. I'm going to say it again: 3 minutes without air or oxygen, 3 hours without shelter in an extreme environment, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Okay, so your priorities as you move forward are going to be focused solely around those 4 items. Well, really, it's 3 items. Oxygen is not really a big deal, but shelter, water, and food. And of course, there's signaling. But anyway, it'll make more sense. Okay, I found a little anecdote online that said that most people in survival situations die from 2 things: exposure and dehydration. Okay, and that goes back to what I just said about 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water. Okay, exposure and dehydration. So remember that, because if you find yourself in a situation in a survival situation, that's how you're going to respond. You're going to address those situations first. Okay, so number 1 priority after you find yourself in a survival situation is shelter. You need to protect yourself from exposure, whether this be in hot environments or cold environments or normal environments, tepid environments. You have to protect yourself from exposure to the elements. Unnecessarily exposing yourself to sun is going to cause dehydration, and it's going to reduce your water resources. Okay, unnecessary exposure to the cold, same thing, is going to cause dehydration. So you must protect yourself from exposure. I said before, you need to reduce your energy expense. You need to conserve. So if you're in a hot environment, you want to do the majority of your work in the early mornings or the late evenings when it's cool. And during the middle of the day, the heat of the day, you need to be sheltering in the shade and just conserving energy. Okay, so we're going to get more into shelters later on, but this is just a quick overview. Okay, number 1 is shelter. Number 2 is fire. Fire does 2 things. Okay, it provides warmth, again, exposure, okay, especially in a cold environment. But even in a hot environment, at night, the temperatures can drop substantially, so you need that warmth. It also provides a substantial amount of morale, and it provides, so that's number 2, it boosts your morale. Number 3, it serves as a signal for searchers. Number 4, it provides a resource for melting snow if you happen to be in a cold environment, or cooking food if you happen to be, if you happen to find food that you can cook. Okay, number 3 is water. You absolutely have to prevent dehydration. We're going to get into that more later on, and some strategies on how you can find water if you don't have it. When we talk about survival kits a little bit, I'm going to tell you then, I'm going to tell you now, whenever you are in the aircraft, you should have water with you. Bring a little Nalgene, a little liter bottle of water. Keep it with you at all times, okay? And hydrate. When you're in between calls, hydrate. You want to make sure that your body is well hydrated, so in case you found yourself in a survival situation, you already have that water stored. You're not already dehydrated. Okay. Number 4 is signaling for help. Okay, that's your 4th priority, is getting a signal going, whether that be starting a fire and putting branches or oil on the fire to let off smoke. Creating some kind of SOS signal, whatnot. We're going to get into signaling more later on, but that's number 4th. And then number 5th is worrying about food. So just to recap the priorities: number 1 is shelter, number 2 is fire, number 3 is water, number 4 is signaling, and number 5 is food. Okay, you're going to base your response around those priorities. Okay. We're going to get into a little bit about tools for survival, and the number one tool that you need to have in your kit, if you will. You always have it with you. You never leave home without it. Is your mind. Okay, you need to be thinking when you are in a survival situation. You need to be thinking every step of the way how you're going to survive. Okay. Okay, now we're going to get into a few more tangible things, and we're going to kind of, these will be items that some you'll need to think about ahead of time before you get into that helicopter or get into that airplane and leave on that mission, and other things, tools or tricks or skills are things that you'll bring with you that you need to have acquired long before you climb into that helicopter. And then other things will be things that you will kind of utilize while you're in that situation. So first, we're going to talk about clothing. Okay, clothing is very important. There's a term that we use in the flight environment, which is dress to egress. Okay, you might find yourself flying in the southwest of the U.S., where it's over 100 degrees in the day, and you're in the back of the aircraft, and the aircraft cabin is in excess of 100 degrees. But if you were to crash in the middle of the desert at night, it could very easily drop into the 40s, 50s. So the risk of hypothermia exists. Okay, so you need to dress and plan for the fact that you're going to have an emergency. So dress to egress. You always want to have a coat with you, even in warm weather. Okay. Some people I see, they wear it all the time, even when it's 100 degrees in the cabin. I think that's kind of I don't know if that's such a good idea, because then you're sweating out all that moisture and you're becoming dehydrated. But having a coat with you in the aircraft at all times is very important. Having a hat with you, whether it be a beanie. In my kit, which you will see in the study guide that you can download after the video is over, you will see my survival kit. It's a kit that I keep with me at all times, and it has the things that I need in order to keep myself safe, so that I am capable of helping my crew members. Okay, but I keep 2 hats in there. The majority of the heat loss is through your head. 40 to 45% of your heat is lost through your head, so you want to keep your head covered. You also lose moisture through your head, so keeping the hat covered even when you are in a hot environment is important. Think about people who live in the desert. They always have their head wraps to keep them cool. Okay? It diminishes water loss and keeps heat in the cold. Okay, you always want to layer your clothing. So don't just have one layer on. If you find yourself in a situation where you're overheating, you need to be able to remove layers, okay? But you also do not want to remove your clothing altogether. And let me say that again. You do not want to remove your clothing altogether. That will expose your skin to the sun and subject you to more dehydration and more exposure, okay? So the layers trap air in between them, and that provides an insulating barrier between the heat or the cold, okay? It allows for removal of different layers if you become overheated without fully exposing your body. Remember this. I remember this from I think it was Bear Grylls that said this. If you sweat, you die. May not have been Bear Grylls. One of the other rescue or survivalists. But anyway, if you sweat, you die. You do not want to sweat. So if you start getting overheated, remove those layers so that you're not sweating. But you do not want to expose yourself. Okay. When you start thinking about layers, think natural fibers. Wool is by far the best one. It does not burn, and it will keep you warm even if it gets wet. Okay, now wool can be pretty uncomfortable. There are new smart wools out there that are treated to make them more comfortable. That's what I wear. I wear a layer of smart wool underneath my flight suit, in addition to smart wool socks. And and then I'll wear in the wintertime, I'll wear another wicking shirt underneath my flight suit. Then I have my flight suit on. Then I will wear a vest, a wicking type vest, and then I have my coat. So I could have 3, 4, 5 layers on at a time. Okay. The other thing about the smart wool or wool material is it does wick, and it keeps the moisture away from your skin. So even if you're in a hot environment, it will keep you dry and keep you from overheating. Okay. I already mentioned hats of some sort. Sunglasses. Sunglasses are important for a number of reasons. You want to protect your eyes if you found yourself in a hot environment, a bright environment. If you are also flying in a snowy environment, you can get snow burns on your retina, and snow blindness will kill you. So I carry sunglasses with me. Think about carrying sunglasses. If you don't have sunglasses or if they got lost in an accident, you can take a piece of cloth. Whoops, sorry, we'll have to cut that out. You can take a strip of cloth that you can tie around your head, and you can cut little slits, right there where your eyes are, and that will block a lot of the glare, and it'll allow you to see and protect your eyes. Something else that people don't think about, and I bring this up a lot to my crews, are boots. Okay? You want to make sure that your boots are in good condition, that they're well polished, and that the tread is in good condition. If you found yourself on a mountain having to hike down, or if you found yourself having to walk through a riverbed, or if you were having to walk through snow, you want to have good traction, and you also want to prevent moisture from getting into your boots and making your feet wet. Okay, that can be equally deadly. Something to think about: if you are in a cold environment, you want to try and do your best to prevent cold injuries, frostbite, and frost nip to your extremities. So one thing that you can do is loosen your boots, and that will allow more air inside your boot, which will thus be more insulating. Okay. Gloves. Gloves are an important thing to think about as well, in addition to hats and boots and all that. I have wool gloves that I keep in my survival kit, and then I also have extra large medical gloves that I can put over those to create another barrier from moisture, prevent moisture from getting in. And then in the survival kit that we have in the aircraft, there are actual insulating gloves. So you want to protect your hands. You're going to be working with your hands in order to build shelters and start fires. You need to protect your hands. Okay. That's a little bit about clothing. About types of clothing. You need to keep your clothing clean and dry. If your clothing gets wet, remove it right away. Even if your body is going to get cold, if you're in a cold environment, you've got to get that wet clothes off of you. Hang it up to dry by the fire. Okay, that's why fire is is pretty high on the priority list. It allows you to warm yourself. It also allows you to warm your clothing. And then you also want to dry your clothing. You also want to keep your clothing clean. Okay, dirty clothing, when it gets caked with dirt and oil and all that stuff, dirt and the oil, it fills those air pockets, and now the clothing is not as insulative as it would be if it was clean. So do your best to keep your clothing dry and clean. It will serve you much better. If you found yourself in a super cold environment, or you're just not staying warm enough, take leaves, take pine needles, take moss, whatever you can find. You can stuff it inside your coat. You can stuff it inside your flight suit. You can stuff it inside your shirt. You can, if you're having to do if you have to create a makeshift shelter out of a poncho, you can pack leaves inside the poncho to create that added loft around your body and to create more insulating layers, more air insulation around your body. Okay. You could put it up in your hat and stuff your hat and insulate your head more. If all you have is a ball cap, you could that would be another way to insulate your head. I have two little stocking caps in my survival kit. One of them would go over my head, then I could pack leaves on top or inside the second one and then pull that on, so that way I don't have leaves right on my head making my head itch. All right, so that's something to think about. That's another way to add insulation. Okay. I said it before. I'll say it again. You cannot help your crew unless you can take care of yourself first. So even though there may be a survival kit, even though there may be a survival kit on the aircraft, you should have your own, and that is for you. That is for you to take care of yourself. Okay, my survival kit is for me. I'm selfish about it. I don't share it with my crew members, because I feel if I can take care of myself, then I can take care of my crew members better. Okay. Survival equipment, it does no good if you can't get to it. So if you've got a survival kit in the tail boom of the helicopter like we do, and it gets destroyed in a crash or in a hard landing, or it's trapped by rubble, or it's burned by fire or whatever, it does us no good. That's why I have my survival kit, and I carry it with me at all times. You'll be able to see that again on the study guide. So carry it on your person. And like I said, I put a picture of what I have in my survival kit on the study guide. Okay. So some of the skills that you need to have learned before you find yourself in a survival situation are how to build a shelter, how to collect water, how to do some basic signaling, and how to find some food. And you'll notice that those are in the same priority or same order as our priorities from the beginning. Building shelter is always number one. At the bottom of the study guide, I have a number of links for you to go to find some great resources for how to build different shelters. Okay, so go and download the study guide, find those links. You can also go to Google and just do a simple search for building survival shelters, and you'll find some great resources out there. I'm not going to go into how to build all those shelters on this video, but you will see that on the test, and so you need to make sure that you go and you do some research on survival shelters. Okay, we will touch a little bit, but not much. Nothing about specific shelter building. And collecting water, again, I'll talk about a few strategies on how to collect water, but you need to do some preparation ahead of time. That will be on the exam. And then signaling as well will be on the exam. Finding food, not so much. That is definitely a skill on how to locate and identify edible foods in the wilderness, and that's beyond the scope of this broadcast. Okay. So, all right, let's touch on shelters now. It's probably the most important skill that you can acquire because it is the number one thing that you need to focus on when you find yourself in a survival situation is how to create a suitable shelter. Okay, so there are some key points about sheltering that I want to touch on. The first one is stay close to the aircraft. Okay, most aircraft have a emergency locator transmitter or ELT, which we'll talk about later, in the aircraft, and most of them cannot be removed. So, uh, when rescuers are coming to look for you, they're going to be tracking that signal. So they're going to be coming to the aircraft. Not only that, it's big and shiny, or it's red like ours, and so it's the most visible. If you're wandering around in the woods thinking you're gonna hike your way down to a road, unless you know without a shadow of a doubt that there is a road a half mile away and you know precisely the direction, stay with the aircraft. Build your shelter near the aircraft. Okay, so you want to make sure that your shelter is simple, and some of the simplest construction is done just using the aircraft. Maybe you used pieces from the aircraft. Um, Maybe you actually shelter under the wing of an aircraft. Um, Something you want to keep in mind though is in a hot environment or a cold environment, that metal aircraft body will 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 conduct cold or heat. So you don't want to shelter inside of the aircraft unless you absolutely have to, because the temperature can be significantly higher or significantly lower than the temperature in a shelter that you construct outside of the aircraft. Okay. Um, when you design your shelter, you want to think about making one that is just big enough for every crew member to shelter inside, but no bigger. Okay, and if you need to create room for storing vital equipment, add that in too. But you want to get all crew members who are still alive, basically, inside one shelter so that your body heat can help warm the space. Okay, but you don't want it too large, otherwise you're trying to heat a space that is just you're trying to heat the air that's not really helping keep you warm. So it's just going to make it harder to heat that space. So keep that in mind. Um, Most likely you're going to end up using natural shelter. Okay, when I say natural shelter, I mean um, not the aircraft and not having to construct a shelter yourself, just a natural space. You want to use that first. Why? It conserves energy, which is one of our chief goals is to conserve energy. Okay, so if you can find a cave, if you can find a rock outcropping that you can shelter under, if you can find a snow pit, something that's already there, that's not going to take a lot of energy, that is going to be your best bet. Okay, but make sure that they're safe. Okay, make sure that you don't have loose rocks that could roll and hit you in the middle of the night. That there aren't dead overhanging trees that might come down. That you're not in a washout basin where if you get a frequent or a flash flood, that you're going to be in danger. Okay. If you must construct a shelter, you need to, like I said previously, do that during periods in the day where you're less likely to be exposed. And again, you still want to stay close to the aircraft. Okay, for all the reasons that I mentioned previously. You want to build your shelter in a location that is protected from the elements. Okay, so if the wind is prevailing from one direction, you want to build it on what is called the leeward side of a rock outcropping, so that the wind is not blowing into you, or use the aircraft to block the wind. Okay, if you've got a fallen tree and you need to construct a lean-to, you want to construct it in such a way that the wind is blowing against the branches and being deflected off and you're sheltering underneath where you're safe from exposure. Okay. Try to use large structures that are already present. So like a fallen down log, you can then get branches, to prop up on that log, so you're not having to fully construct an entire shelter. You can use pieces from the aircraft. Whatever it is, you want to try to build your shelter using large structures, or structures that are already in place that you don't have to move. And then you want to try and use debris that's close to the crash site or the landing site. You don't want to be expending a lot of energy hiking off 2 miles looking for branches. Do what you can to construct something close by. If you've got rocks, you can pile up rocks and create a wind barrier using rocks. If you've got upright trees and you've got fallen down trees and branches, maybe you can wedge the branches in between 2 standing trees to create a wall. There's plenty of pictures out there on how to create these different structures. Okay. Again, you don't want to be near water drainage. You don't want, if you're in a cold environment, you don't want to build your shelter in a low spot. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but if you're building like a wood shelter, you don't want to build in a low spot, because at night that cold air is going to sink down into that low region, and it's going to be colder than if you're higher up. Okay. Again, talked a little bit about hazards. Stay away from loose trees, avalanche chutes if you're in a snowy area, loose rocks, things of that nature. Okay. You do not want to lie directly on the ground. Your patients, whomever. You do not want to lie directly on the ground. So the ground will either be, quite a bit warmer or colder than the air, even just 6-8 inches above the ground. So if you have the means to pile up some rocks and create a platform and get your body up off the ground, a few inches, that will significantly reduce the amount of heat loss or heat transfer between your body and the ground. If you can't, lots and lots and lots of leaves, brush, branches, whatever, but you gotta get up off the ground. Okay, that's going to create that insulating barrier. The ground can be in excess of 30 degrees hotter or colder than the air just above it. So get yourself up. Okay. We talked a little bit about fire now. So we've talked about shelters and some strategies for building a shelter. There's plenty of videos out there. Look into that, not only for your just kind of have a better idea in your mind when you're sitting down to take the exam, but also just for your own safety when you're out, in the wilderness and working in the flight environment in case you needed this. It's good to be well versed in different ways to build shelters. Okay. All right. We talked about fire. Now, fire should be started as soon as possible. Again, it's going to provide you that signaling capability, the security that comes with the fire. You don't want to be scrambling to get a fire lit when it's dark. So get that fire going as soon as possible, as soon as practical, I should say. For signaling purposes, okay, we're going to talk more about signaling, but you want to try and make sure that your signal is contrasted to the surrounding area. So if you're in an area that's very dark, you want to use white smoke. How do you generate white smoke? You can take green branches and put it on your fire. Once you got the fire going really well, you don't want to accidentally snuff it out. If you are in a light area like a desert, you want to use black smoke. If you can collect oil or fuel from the aircraft, even if it's a hard landing, remember, this is a survival situation. They can bring you more fuel if you're just stuck on the ground. But you need to, if you have no way of getting help to you, you need to let people know where you are, so you can pillage some oil from the aircraft and burn that. Okay, you want to start preparing before it gets dark, and you want to over prepare. And one of the great things about fires and collecting wood is it gives you a constant project to work on. If you find yourself in a prolonged survival situation, if you're constantly looking for firewood, it keeps your mind engaged. It keeps you working on tasks that are specific and directed towards improving your chances of survival. Okay, keeps people busy. You want to collect. You want to make sure that you have enough wood stockpiled before you go to sleep that's going to get you through the night. Okay. You always want to carry at least 2 sources of ignition in your survival kit. Maybe a flint and what do they call it? Like a magnesium lighter is what I have, and then a little waterproof container of waterproof matches. Even though they're waterproof matches, put them in a waterproof container. You don't want anything to happen, okay? So you always want to have 2 methods of starting a fire. I'm going to practice. Okay, this is not something you want to be doing for the first time when you find yourself in an emergency situation. You need to practice these skills. Okay? All right. Next, we're going to talk about water. Okay? Water is definitely a priority in a survival situation. We talked about, I mentioned before, you always want to carry some water with you in a liter Nalgene. Okay. You also want to carry purification tablets. While you collect, while you're out in the woods or wherever it might be, and you need to purify it before you consume it. You can boil it if you're able to start a fire and you've got something you can boil it in. You can use iodine tablets, whatever. You could even, if you really want to go crazy and carry a water purification, water filter, you can do that too. I think we have one in our survival kit. So you want to drink before you get thirsty. If you're already thirsty, then you're already dehydrated. I talked about drinking when you're in between flights to maintain that pre-flight hydration. Okay, and you want to think 1 to 1.5 liters per day is absolute minimum. And monitor your urine. Okay, if your urine's dark, you're dehydrated. You need to drink more. If water's plentiful, okay, if you have an ample supply of water, drink. Drink as much as you can. You do not want to become dehydrated, and you do not want to become thirsty. Okay? If water is not plentiful, you've got that water that you're carrying with you. You want to conserve your water until you have found a water source. Okay. You don't want to just drink all your water and then you can't and you have nothing left to ration. So conserve. Hopefully, if you've been doing it right, you have. You've been well hydrated before your flight, and now you have enough to get you through until you can find a water source, and then you can start continuing to hydrate yourself. There are some strategies for collecting water in a survival situation. There's something called a dew bag, okay, DEW bag. You can take a plastic bag, you can put it over the limb of a tree, okay, so that the leaves and everything are encompassed within the bag, and leave it overnight. Trees perspire, and that water that is let off will collect in the bag. You can put a little pebble in the bottom of the bag so it weights it down a little bit and creates a reservoir, and you can get a substantial amount of water. You can get, I think, in excess of a liter per day per branch for up to 3 days. So double check me on that, but I think that's what I've read. You can get a lot of water from a single branch, and then you just move to another branch. So that's one way. If you're in an environment where it's potential for rain, collect rainwater. Put out plastic bags. Pull off a door of the aircraft, turn it upside down so it'll collect rain. So you've got something to drink if it does rain. If you're in an area that's very grassy, and you've got absorbent cloths or whatever, you can wrap those around your legs and then walk through the grass, and that dew in the morning, that morning dew will absorb into the towels, and you can wring those towels out and collect that water, suck on the cloths to get that water. Okay, all kinds of ways to get water. If you're in an area where there are dry creek beds or seasonal creek beds or river beds, you can dig down deep in the bottom of those river beds and get down to where the water table is, and that water will start to percolate up through the bottom, depending on how dry the ground is, of course. But it might happen where that water will start to percolate up through the soil as you dig down, and that's water that you can then collect and purify and drink. Again, this is all about survival. Snow. You do not want to eat snow. it will drop your core temperature and it'll induce hypothermia. So if you're in an area where there's snow, collect the snow and melt it. If you've got a fire, you can melt it over the fire. If you don't, you can collect it up in a towel or a shirt or something and hang it and let it melt, in the sunlight, and then it'll either soak into the shirt, or it'll then drip down into a container that you put underneath there to collect it. So those are ways to convert water into, or snow into water. You can put it inside your Nalgene if you need to. Put it inside your flight suit and let your body warmth melt that snow. But don't eat snow. Another thing to remember when it comes to conserving water is don't eat. Eating uses water for digestion. Okay, so if you don't have water, don't eat. You can survive for weeks without food. Okay, but you need your water. Remember the rule of threes again. Okay, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay. Sometimes, and this goes back to the conservation of water, sometimes simply the act of searching for water might result in a net loss of water. So you may use more water searching for water than you might find. So in that case, you've got a net negative water intake, and it's not worth it. So consider that when you're contemplating going out and searching for water. Okay, it's all about conserving. If you need to expend some water in order to find a greater source of water, that's great. Okay, but just that's going to be situational and something you're going to have to think about on a case-by-case basis. Okay, we're going to talk about signaling now. Signaling is how you're going to be found. Okay, every aircraft has what's called an emergency locator transmitter, emergency locator transmitter, or ELT. Okay. The civilian emergency distress frequency is 121.5 megahertz. Okay, remember that. 121.5 megahertz. That will probably be on your test. The military distress frequency is 243.0. Okay, so 121.5, 243. There is a new frequency that is basically, well, it's not new. It's been around for a while, but it's become universal. It's become the standard as of February 2009, and that's the 406 megahertz emergency locator transmitter beacon. Okay, you'll hear the 121.5 and the 243 referred to as guard frequencies. Most aircraft, civilian aircraft, are still required to monitor 121.5. 121.5 and 243 have been phased out of the search and rescue surveillance spectrum. So, for those of you who don't know, there's a web of satellites that circle the globe. They're part of what's called the SARSAT system, the search and rescue satellite system, and they're just up there monitoring for search and rescue signals. Primarily 120. Well, it used to be primarily 121.5 and 243, and in February 2009, 121.5 and 243 were phased out of being monitored by the SARSAT system, and now it only monitors for 406 megahertz. We'll talk a little bit more about 406 megahertz, but aircraft will still have the ability to listen for 121.5 and 243, and the reason for that is the 406 megahertz ELTs will also transmit a signal on 121.5 for honing in. So an aircraft, if they're within 4 or 5 miles of your ELT that's transmitting a 121.5 emergency signal, will pick that up and they can hone in on it to try and locate you. Now, 406 is, like I said, it's been around a while, but it's the standard now, and that the frequency those ELTs transmit a data burst up to a satellite that can more closely pinpoint your location, and if that ELT is connected into your aircraft's GPS system, it will actually send a latitude longitude of your aircraft. And it can also be programmed to transmit aircraft information. So it can transmit, the owner, the aircraft owner's, the company name, the type of aircraft, a description of the aircraft, tail number, all of that information. As long as it's programmed into the ELT's database, it'll transmit that data burst as well to the Search and Rescue Center, and they can send somebody right to your location very quickly. They can have all the information in your location within minutes. Whereas previously, the ELTs that transmitted on 121.5 could take hours. The satellite may not come by except every 2 hours and pick up that signal, and it has to come by at least 2 times, preferably 3 times, to be able to triangulate on your location to get a semi-accurate location. And then like I said, most 406 ELTs still have a homing signal on them that transmits on the 121.5 frequency, so that civilian aircrafts can listen in and try to locate you as they're getting close. Some ELTs are manually activated. Most of them, if not all of them, are also activated by G-force. So I think it's 4 Gs, the aircraft impacts the ground, and it triggers the ELT. If you don't have a hard landing, you just grounded, most aircraft have a switch that you can push to turn on that ELT, and it'll transmit your location. Some of them are removable, and if for whatever reason you had to evacuate the aircraft and had to leave the area because it was unsafe, and you can take the ELT with you, grab it with you, and keep it with you. Otherwise, stay close to the aircraft. Other ways of signaling, everybody knows the international distress signal of SOS. You can mark that in the snow or with debris. Anything groups of 3, so 3 rocks in a row. If you had the means to pile up branches in big piles, if you put 3 of them out there, that's a distress signal. Putting a big cross on the ground that's visible from the air, that's an international distress signal for distress, international distress signal. We talked about white smoke versus black smoke and when to use them. That's going to be another signaling device. A flashlight flashing excuse me. Blinking a flashlight 3 times. Morse code, the international distress signal in Morse code is ... So it's dits and dashes. It's whatever. It's 3 groups of 3. So short, long, short. Okay. So 3 groups of 3. Signaling mirrors is also vitally important. If you got lots of sunlight, you can reflect that mirror. You can flash it and you can aim them. Most of them have a little hole in the middle for aiming, so you look at that hole and you can flash the you can signal at an aircraft in the sky. The other thing to think about is every so often take that signaling mirror and just kind of sweep the horizon, because an aircraft even at night, well, I guess at night you're not going to have sunlight to reflect. Take that signaling mirror and flash the horizon. An aircraft that's out there searching for you can see that flash long before you will see them or hear them. Likewise, if it's at night, do the same with a flashlight. Every so often, sweep the horizon with that flashlight. Most search and rescue aircraft are being operated with night vision goggles, and so they will see that light long before you ever see their lights at night. Okay? You always want to think about contrasting colors. Like I said before, we talked about SOS. We talked about putting a large X on the ground. If you are in a snowy environment, same thing. You can take leaves, any kind of branches. They'll contrast against the snow. If you have nothing, if you happen to be in the middle of Alaska's tundra, if you pack down the snow in an X or an SOS, that packed snow will contrast against the fluffy snow around it, and that can also be a signal. Okay. And then whistles. Whistles is another great thing for signaling to search and rescuers that might be searching for you on foot. Okay. I'm going to come back. I'm going to say this one last time. You absolutely have to minimize your energy and your fluid loss. Conduct your work in periods of the day where you're less likely to be exposed. You need to conserve your energy and your fluid. Okay. Remember, survival is mostly a state of mind. You have to have that will to survive. That's what's going to get you through this crisis. This is the best tool you have to think your way through the problem. I got a bunch of resources on the study guide that you can download. You go over to FlightCrit.com. At the top right of the screen, there is a FlightCrit Friday replay. You click on that. You can rewatch this this broadcast. And right there to the right, there's going to be a picture of the study guide. You can click on that and you can download the study guide for free. You can use it to prepare for your exam. I want to thank you for spending the last hour with me. I do appreciate it. I do hope that this was helpful. Like I said at the beginning, if you have questions, tweet them to me while I'm driving home at FlightCrit. At FlightCrit Friday. I will definitely respond to your questions. You can also, if you go over to FlightCrit.com, at the bottom of the page, there's a little button that says, if you have a question, I want to know about it. You can click on that button. You can send me a voicemail direct to my inbox, straight from your computer. You don't have to do anything. You can ask me your question. I will answer your question, and I may even feature your question on the FlightCrit podcast, which is coming soon. If you like what I'm doing here and you want more of it, please follow me on Periscope at FlightCrit, hashtag FlightCrit Friday Live. I'm sorry, FlightCrit Live, but my handle there is is FlightCrit, so at FlightCrit and hashtag FlightCrit Live. I'm also on Twitter, where I tweet out all these broadcasts. I also tweet out new information. You can communicate with me there. I do have a Facebook page and group as well. Come on over to Facebook, join the group. It's facebook.com/FlightCrit. I've got a growing community there where people are asking questions and engaging and learning about air medical services and how to pass the flight paramedic exam. I'm also on Google+. That's where the majority of my hangouts or these broadcasts originate from. Every Friday at 9 a.m., I do FlightCrit Friday. It's a Google Hangout. I would love for you to come and join my broadcast and participate in the conversation. I can have up to 9 additional people actually participating in the conversation, and we can talk, and you can ask questions live, and that'll be part of the broadcast. Everybody else, you can just listen in and then rewatch the replay after the fact. So again, thank you very much. My name is Sean. FlightCrit.com is my website, and I sure hope this was helpful. I'll see you next Friday, where we're going to be going over aircraft fundamentals and safety, which is part 2 of this section of preparing for the FPC exam. If you like this, share it, tell all your buddies, tell all your friends, let's grow this community and help as many people as we can pass this flight paramedic exam. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next Friday.